everybody. Thank you so much for joining our weekly Friday Lunch and Learn with the Sierra Club Iowa chapter. This week we have a really awesome presentation. There's already a preview here on the screen that you can see. We are going to talk about the Peregrine Falcon and raptors, and Pat Schlarbaum is just an amazing person who's majorly responsible for making sure that we have raptors in the Iowa skies. And he's done a ton of work with the DNR and through other means on making sure that the Peregrine Falcon and other falcons and raptors are here. So I'm excited for this lunch and learn. We're going to see lots of really cool pictures and hear some stories. I'm going to make this intro really quick. So if you have questions or comments, throw those in the chat because we'll get to those towards the end. And then make sure you're sharing the video so that more people can see it. But Pat, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really looking forward to this presentation and seeing all these beautiful pictures and hearing the stories, because this is quite the thing that you've done. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, it's my pleasure. And introductorily speaking, I always felt of our role with the Department of Natural Resources. Actually, when we started this project, we were still the Iowa Conservation Commission back in the day. But as a go-between role, is kind of how I always felt with the passion that all your Sierra Club members exhibit for the environment and those incredible resources that I had the privilege of working with, but just kind of as a go-between. We really just brought out what the people of Iowa were asking us to do, and us meaning the Wildlife Diversity Program for the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. So a lot of the work initially was on keystone species. The non-game program, or the Wildlife Diversity Program, caught its infancy in about 1982. And we were the chickadee checkoff folks on your tax returns. That's how we received our funding. There were no licenses, or the funding base was always somewhat nebulous, but we did the best we could with what we had. And one of the projects that we started initially was working with the American kestrels, which are a small falcon. And we had heard about falcon work to the north in Minnesota and Wisconsin in the mid-1980s. And then lo and behold, we put together a proposal. It was accepted by the Iowa Conservation Commission, and we embarked on bringing peregrine falcons back to Iowa in 1989. Now, these are the birds that historically were wiped out from the Mississippi River to the East Coast. The birds that everybody realized was our national symbol were in a drastic decline in the 1960s, but it was the peregrine falcons that were wiped out. We got down to about 427 nesting pairs of bald eagles, but so we didn't quite lose the bald eagle, but we were probably going to if we didn't ban the DDT. The other big raptor that we had the privilege of working with were the ospreys. So when you think of these keystone species, you might think of the ospreys as ambassadors for clean water. Bald eagles, it's always makes you feel good to see bald eagles. And these peregrine falcons that I felt were the keystone species of the Endangered Species Act that was implemented in 1973. But again, by then they were wiped out. They have a lot of different names. You're going to hear some falconry terms. I will try to keep this not with a lot of vernacular that people aren't familiar with, but they call these birds the longwings. They call them rockhawks because historically that's where they nested in the cliffs of Northeast Iowa. There were a nesting account in Black Hawk County and also in Johnson County and in Boone County, for what it's worth. Actually, I said Boone, I should have said Dallas, but I always kind of wondered if it might have been the Ledges in Boone County, and they just kind of were deferring it. But primarily the cliffs of Northeast Iowa in the driftless region is where the peregrine falcons had nested for millennia and then were wiped out by 1965. Another name you'll hear if you start watching some of these, their feet are proportionally pretty big. So they're referred to as either a long wing or a great footed hawk. The the thing that I would like to impress upon you is this might be the fastest species on the planet. Generally, when they're flapping along, they can hardly keep up with a mourning dove. But what they do, they go into a stoop. Well, that's a falconry term, but they go up maybe a few thousand feet in the air. And another term that they're called is a duck hawk. So particularly along the waterway of the Mississippi River, if ducks were flying across the river and in a vulnerable position of being attacked, these falcons go way up in the air. They'll roll over. They tuck their feathers, their wings, and go into what is referred to as a stoop. Now, this is a pretty marvelous anatomical situation that's starting to occur. I don't know if you can see my pointer, but if you look in those nasal openings, you see like a little protuberance. Well, that is a way to deflect the air current to keep it from just throttling right through to the back of their brain. They're going to approach speeds of 270 miles an hour. And in that velocity, it's been shown that it would take out the back of their skull. So they have these baffles, just like a modern jet has to baffle the air that comes into their nasal cavities. They have a nictitating membrane that's on the lower side of their eyelid that comes up. And that nictitating membrane then protects their eye as they're involved with this stoop. They're moving along what appears to be in a descent, but actually it's been shown that that they really do not turn their head. They have to see their prey through the fovea of their eye. And the fovea is like the deep recesses, but when they lock on to the prey through their fovea, every muscle, every feather is designed for efficiency to strike that prey with those big feet. So as they go by the prey, they basically stick their foot out and clip them behind the head, and it stuns the prey to the extent that they're helpless, and the bird then will swing around and grab it and then guide it into shore, because a duck can weigh 2 or 3 times what these 2-pound birds are achieving at this point of impact. And I hope you can see that notch in its beak. Now, this is unique to the only raptor that has this, but that notch is designed to separate the vertebrae of their prey. So what you've just witnessed is an incredible aerial display of not only anatomical features, but that when they lock into their prey and hold their head at the side, they're actually spiraling so that they don't have to turn their head to see the prey. They're actually flying, in a spiral around the prey as it gets closer and closer. And it's called a logarithmic spiral. It's a mathematical term, and these birds kind of exhibit that in nature's only way. So they're quite a bird. They're quite a bird. They were here historically, and like I mentioned earlier, the last nesting that we knew of was at a place called Kapolei on the Raleigh Buckmeister farm in far northeast Iowa. Here's another little shot, and this you can kind of see how the bird needs to have the prey off to the side so it doesn't have to turn its head to see it. So that's what we've got. We had a situation where they were gone. We had attempts at bringing back other raptor species like the American kestrels, its cousin, and thought maybe these peregrine falcons would have a chance to come. And it was the dark clouds of the pesticide era of DDT that wiped them out. I think with this group, I can probably say that you're all familiar with DDT, but just to let you know, sometimes with school children, I make sure that they realize that some of these pesticides are not only deleterious to wildlife, but they can harm human beings too. So thanks to Rachel Carson, this was all brought out. I might point out that in 1962, when she wrote her book, Silent Spring, and it started receiving a lot of scrutiny, and she was roundly criticized and debunked by the industry. And she passed away from cancer I think in 1966. So she was never ever able to realize the recovery that we've all experienced now since DDT was banned in 1972. I'm kind of watching for questions if you have any. And it was the eggshell thinning that was proven scientifically, that was widely debunked by the chemical industry, much as they seem to always feel like compelled to downplay their impacts on the environment. But these peregrine falcons were gone. And then through this era, here's a man that was a part of Francis Hammerstrom's Gaboon squad that went and documented the demise of the peregrine falcon, the last nesting pair I mentioned at Kapolei in 1965. This man came and helped band birds just in the next cliff up in the 2000s with Bob Anderson's Raptor Resource Project. And a little bit of history on these falcons. 4,000 years takes you way back to medieval times, that falconers were attracted to working with these birds and hunting with these birds. And lo and behold, there were anatom genetics of the peregrine falcons that were still in circulation by the falconers in the 1960s and 70s. And they were the ones that donated their birds, their breeding pairs, to Cornell and the bird lab to embark on bringing peregrine falcons back. They produced young falcons in captivity. And again, this was all due to the private sector that had these birds, the falconers, that donated these birds to the agencies that then implemented a recovery. And this is a sign of a release site in Weaver Dunes in 1982. Ironically, that was the first effort. If you notice, they're quite a distance from the cliff. You can kind of see the cliffs in the background there by the legs of this release structure, or what they call a hack structure. This structure was placed in great horned owl territory. Great horned owls were a major predator on about all flying species, including the peregrine falcons. And it was determined that maybe there were just too many great horned owls to try to really bring these birds back to those historic cliffs. So they started focusing on the urban areas where there may be a great horned owl presence, but it's incredibly diminished from what they were seeing in the wilds, where the great horned owls were kind of the tiger of the night skies in the wilds. But the cities had a prey population of pigeons and other birds, a lot of starlings. They had the tall buildings, which kind of assimilated the cliffs, but they also had those updrafts. These peregrine falcons require the updrafts throughout their hunting strategies. So the cities kind of became a pseudo release site. Minneapolis had success. You're looking at Des Moines. We came here in 1991 and released 19 peregrine falcons that summer in Des Moines. And then, and here's a picture of yours truly in the sunglasses from, I guess, the first year. I think this is a structure where we started in Cedar Rapids in 1989 and 90, and then went to Des Moines. But this is through the U.S. cellular system that was our partner. And, well, they let us use their rooftop, and that's the release structure in the background. The bars were not necessarily to keep the young bird falcons in, but it kept the great horned owls and any other predator winged birds from preying upon these young vulnerable peregrine falcons. So we'd get them when they were about 42 days of age. They couldn't fly yet, but they could tear apart food on their own. So the adults were not having to feed the young, and we could just drop food in on them for a week or 10 days. And then they would gain their flight skills, and then we'd remove the bars and they'd start flying all over town and creating a lot of wonderful activities. It wasn't until 1993 that Iowa had any nesting from these releases. This is a shot of a little peregrine falcon, and the eggs, as you can tell, they're about the size of like a banty rooster or a banty chicken's egg. They're pretty small, relatively, feeding young, and they have between I think they average about 2.7 young, but as many as 5. So that was all. Reproduction was always necessary. It was one thing to release birds, but you got to have the reproduction to really have a successful program. So we're moving along. I wish I'd have slipped this picture in earlier when we were talking about the releases, because I've got a few images of the kids. Now, this is beneath the Iowa American Enterprise building. We were banding, but wherever we went, the peregrine falcons are elicitors of incredible passion when it comes to our human friends. There's a lot of people that were pulling for these birds, and this is a famous shot. These are all ho-chunk children from Black River Falls, Wisconsin. Now, we're at Effigy Mounds, where we did release birds with the Raptor Resource Project in 1999 and 2000. We, meaning I assisted them with a lot of the paperwork. But those cliffs of Northeast Iowa are sacred to the Ho-Chunk Nation, or some people still refer to them as the Winnebago. But they kind of feel like, well, the Winnebagos, they left their Winneshiek and Decorah and Winnebago. They left Black River Falls. We stayed, so they've kind of reverted their name back to the original Ho-Chunk. And these are Ho-Chunk youth. And they would come to see the birds on the cliffs, have a boat ride on the river. And it was really a way to kind of give back to their blessing, if you will, because when it came time to release these birds from sacred cliffs, we felt it was prudent to have the common courtesy to weave in any Ho-Chunk involvement. And they really latched right onto it. They loved it. And they loved the return of the peregrine falcons also to those sacred cliffs. And here's overlooking McGregor and a bunch of people. And here's Bob Anderson, that when Bob would come and help with all the kids to show these birds off. So I guess it's been a high profile project. We were fortunate to have nesting, as I mentioned, starting in 1993. In the year 1999, the federal or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service thought we had the numbers of falcons to say they were no longer endangered on a national scale. But at that time, there were 0 back on the cliffs. So that was kind of our motivation to kind of stay with Bob Anderson's Raptor Resource Project and work through him. And he was a falconer. He was a falcon breeder. Minnesota told him no. And in Iowa, we said, what's the advantage of telling somebody like Bob Anderson no, that he could not release birds in the wild, that the urban birds were going to spill over. And he felt that the urban birds were kind of killing each other for the urban sites. They were not going to spill over. We needed to release them in the wild areas. And with the Ho-Chunk blessings, that's what we did. And then in 2003, we had a bird show up at the Iowa State Capitol. And it was from that nesting that we held a, well, I'll just kind of back up a little bit. In the year 1998 and 1999, Bob Anderson's Raptor Resource Project released 19 birds from effigy mounds. And from that, it did not start off as one bird, one pair, two pairs, three pairs. It went from 0 to 5 nesting pairs in 1 year of the year 2000. And by 2001, there was additional wild nesting pairs. And it was pretty obvious that for Bob Anderson to bring his released birds to Iowa, to release them at effigy mounds, was a good thing. And Lowell Washburn and Tom Deckert, some Iowa falconers, they released 40 more in Dubuque in that same time frame of 1999 and 2000 and 2001. So not only did we have the urban birds, because at that point we had nesting pairs in Des Moines and Cedar Rapids, but now we're starting to pick up these birds back in those historic cliff sites. And it was from that we declared them no longer endangered in Iowa, because we went from 2 nesting pairs to, by 2009, we had 10 nesting pairs with the ones that we picked up on the river. But that's not to toot our own horn, because again, this project would not have gone anywhere without not only the falconers, but the support of Iowans that contributed to the chickadee checkoff. But I've got a few more minutes. I'm going to kind of give you guys an encouragement to come down to the state capitol. This is a male falcon. This is on the statuettes on the west side of the capitol. And this male was the downtown nesting male, and he attracted a second female to the capitol in 2003. And then in 2003, and then 2008, this bird fledged. I think the first year there were 2 young on the east side of the Capitol building. And I think there's 49 other state capitals that would love to have a pair of peregrine falcons, because people think that we brought these birds to the cities to control the pigeons. Well, it's not that they control them, but they have an impact on the pigeons. The pigeons left the Capitol. You'll go down and see a few, but the maddening hordes of peregrine or of pigeons that used to be at the Capitol have been diminished because of the presence of these peregrine falcons. So how do you get peregrines nesting? You make all these ledges. So a ledge or a little alcove is a potential nest site. That's what peregrines look for in those natural cliffs. But all the ledges are sloped so that the water is shunted away from the building, so the eggs roll off. So we went up and we got a crane and where this female liked to be. And there's another story about this, but I'll have to save for another time. But 4 inches of pea gravel with a 6-inch board in that alcove and here's what you got. And then we had to kind of work with the building. They didn't let us put a ladder. So I made this little mirror to document that we did have peregrines, because we delayed a window project and said, well, the falcons are nesting and all that activity will probably might be discouraging to the peregrines. So let's let them finish their nesting and then we'll finish the window project when the falcons are done. How about that? And they said, okay. And then I said, well, but how long is that going to be? And I said, well, it depends on when she lays the eggs. And well, how are we going to know? Or how do you know that? And, well, I can kind of tell by the way she's incubating. She's incubating something. I think it would be eggs. But anyway, I had to come up with this little mirror to document having the birds. And you can kind of see the 2 little young there in the background of this. My good friend, Bill Hareen, took this picture. But the era of digital cameras, I was able to take a picture of a mirror to document that we did have peregrines on the building. And then, of course, as they got bigger, we could see them. This was the second year when they had 4 young. And I was kind of, we were getting this all figured out. but this is on the east side of the Capitol. And Jess was hoping we could do a field trip and do this right there. But this time of year, it's pretty sporadic that they're still at the Capitol. A lot of times you'll see them in the mornings, but not throughout the day. But in April, guaranteed, you too can see something like this. And I don't think I have time to talk about the prey base items. But the peregrine falcons are back. They're at our state capitol. There's been some evidence over in Lincoln, but theirs doesn't stay. But in Iowa, we've had peregrine falcon nesting at the Capitol since 2008. And then it gets back to why these birds were revered by not only our generation, but by the mound builders way back when. And I might just leave this for questions, leave you with this thought that this generation of humans that occupied this rich resource of the driftless area felt so much about their falcons that they made these bird effigies. And it was Bob Anderson that went and measured these. And a male falcon is called a tiercel, and that means 1/3. And the distance across here is 143 feet, and across the larger one is 207, which are proportionally, in other words, the mound builders built their pair of birds in the proportions of peregrine falcons. So any questions? Is that a good point to leave this, Jess?
Yes, Pat, that was absolutely wonderful. And those pictures, I could just look at them all day because they're just beautiful. And I don't think we get to see it from that angle very often.
Yeah, it was Clark Malum that went and made this outline, or his graduate students made this outline. But it took Bob Anderson to look at it and go, that's to scale. Those aren't just bird effigies. They are honoring peregrine falcons.
Wow.
So and I think you said that these images will be on your website.
Yeah, I think if you say it's okay, we'll upload them up onto our website, and we'll put a link to that here in the Facebook chat so you can watch it.
And from there, I'll be more than happy to answer questions and things. The immortal Bob Anderson, he's the guy that we have the Decorah Eagle Camp as due to Bob Anderson and his Raptor Resource Project. But he came to Iowa to do the peregrine falcon work. And then once he succeeded at that, then he turned his attention to the bald eagles. But if you look here, he's pointing in two different directions at the same time. So he was quite the Bob Anderson. Yeah. Just love that man.
Yeah, thank you for these stories. We do have one question here on Facebook from Mike. It says, I seem to be seeing more raptors in the city. Is there more prey there now than in rural areas? So what's it like today?
Well, I think the raptor numbers are increasing right along, and he's probably referring to the Cooper's hawks. They're an accipiter that they're like a peregrine. They go after other birds, but also squirrels and mammals. But Cooper's hawks historically did not nest in towns, and now they do. In fact, at our release site in Dubuque in the 2000s, it was mid-2000s that I documented Cooper's hawks nesting in an urban park, and now it's just grown every year. So there are red tails, but a lot of them are Cooper's hawks in the urban settings.
Wow. And how many nesting pairs are there in Iowa now?
When I retired in 2017, we were up to about, I'm going to say 18 nesting pairs. They weren't always successful at the same time, but what happened on the Mississippi River from McGregor to Keokuk is every city had a peregrine falcon presence when I retired. And that was just one generation. So they went from zero to and there'll never be a bird that will darken the sky with their numbers. There'll always be at the apex, at the very top of the food chain. So there's always just a very few that can reside in that upper echelon. But they were in every city from McGregor to Keokuk.
Yeah. Well, last question before we wrap up then is, So if we're outside and we see a big raptor, we think it might be a peregrine falcon, what kind of things should we be looking for to know
What to look
if that's
for?
what
Ah,
we're
a
seeing?
really good question. Yeah. Quite often in Iowa, you're going to see more and more bald eagles. Their wing plane is flat. If it's more like a V, if it's a big black bird, there's quite likely turkey vultures, and they kind of tip side to side as they fly. But if it's flat and very, very solid, it's probably a bald eagle. But these birds are flat, 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 but proportionally, they have long wings. And then that helmeted, if you get them in the light and see those colors, there's just no other bird that is as colorful as the peregrine falcons. But in Des Moines, if you're on the east side of the Capitol in April, chances are it'll be the peregrines because they chase off all the eagles and turkey vultures and anything else. They're pretty territorial in that regard.
Well, we might have to line something up for April at the Capitol then for
Oh,
our
I
lunch
love it.
and learn then,
Be
because
glad
we'd
to
love
do
to
it.
see that. This has just
Yeah,
been
I'd be
such
glad to
an
do it. Yeah, we could do that. Okay.
Thank you so much, Pat. This has been truly an incredible presentation, and the pictures and your stories combined, it's just so fascinating. I could listen to a whole other hour of this if we had time. So we will, if you don't mind, we'll grab those slides and we'll put them up on our website because there are some more pictures in here that we didn't get to, and just they're beautiful to look at. So thank you for your passion on this. This is such an important thing in Iowa to make sure that we are protecting our wildlife and reintroducing them if they're extinct. Thank you for your work.
Thank you so much for all that the Sierra Club provides, not only the citizens of Iowa, but our precious resources. And it was time to bring peregrine falcons back, and it's good to keep them with us now.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Big thank you to Pat, and we will be back live at noon next Friday, and we will be posting that topic early next week. So stay tuned and we'll see you next Friday.